have noticed, but I've not really made a video about the upcoming Aegon's Conquest movie in development at Warner Brothers. Honestly, because the whole thing kind of baffles me a bit. We've known for a couple of years now that Mattson Tomlin had been working on an Aegon's Conquest TV show for HBO. Not only had he been working directly with George R. R. Martin on it, but it appears he had at least written a treatment and begun working on scripts. So it did just seem a matter of time before HBO announced the project officially. So I was very shocked when it was leaked last month that Warner Brothers, HBO's parent company, were developing an Aegon's Conquest movie, being written by Beau Willimon, another writer with an impressive CV. It became clear that these were competing projects, with one being given the green light. We now know that Williamson's movie is the project that will be moving forward, which while I think is actually for the best, it's a shame for Tomlin given how many years of work he put into the TV show version and how far along in the process he was. From his Twitter, it really did seem like he loved the project. There is still a bit of uncertainty surrounding Tomlin's TV show, given we've not actually had any firm confirmation it's been canned by HBO in favour of the movie, but I think that's really a given. I have heard some rumours from someone I consider a reliable source that the intent may be for a possible sequel show to the movie covering the reign of Aegon into the Sons of the Dragon, with some of the work that Tomlin did for the show not going to waste in its entirety in this case. If this was to be the case, it would actually make a lot of sense. Aegon's Conquest itself narratively works better as a movie than a TV show, while Aegon's reign has a much more fleshed out narrative and more depth that works better on TV. But whether on TV or not, the idea of an Aegon's Conquest movie has some huge issues that need to be overcome to actually make it a compelling story. The Conquest itself is very straightforward. Aegon basically lands at the Blackwater Rush and the kingdoms fall like dominoes. Yes, there is a lot of really cool action set pieces, such as the burning of Harrenhal, the last storm, and the field of fire, likely being the high points of the movie. But because it's so easy for Aegon, there really isn't much of a compelling story to tell until we get to the failed invasion of Dorne, which is the only part of the Conquest that challenges Aegon in a meaningful way. But I think the actual Dornish war that occurs is well beyond the scope of this movie. What I want to do with this video is break down 4 or 5 huge challenges that this movie has to overcome to narratively work and actually be a compelling story to the general audience they will want to pay their money to go and see. So, where is the drama and conflict going to come from if the Conquest is that easy? How are the audience meant to be drawn in to these huge scale action set pieces when there's absolutely no jeopardy for any of the main characters? I have 2 clear ideas here. There are some battles and events that you really just can't change that much. The burning of Harrenhal and the field of fire, most of all. Because as far as battles go, they are extremely one-sided. The Targaryens were always going to win, it's never a question. However, I think you have an opportunity to do something special with The Last Storm. Not only is it mostly a dragonless pitched battle, it's happening during raging storm that's visually cinematic and dynamic. I think you could actually make some changes from the book version to make it a bit more compelling. For example, removing Rhaenys and Meraxes from the battle. At least in the same manner they are involved in Fire and Blood. You have King Argilac Durrandon's charge up the hills of Bronzegate 3 times before he breaks the Targaryen line, where all seems lost for Orys Baratheon and his men. And then, from within the storm clouds, we could have Rhaenys Meraxes appearing out of nowhere, raining fire and blood upon the Stormlanders. While all that's going on, you can then have Orys's one-on-one duel with Argilac. So with these minor changes like this, you can make some of the battles of the Conquest a little bit more risky, with a little bit more jeopardy to them. Plus, of course, you have Rhaenys coming to save the day, which for a non-book reader would be extremely unexpected, given you could establish beforehand that she isn't much of a warrior. So by removing her from the main march of the army, it comes by complete surprise. While I love the book version where she is travelling with them, waiting up the hill with Orys, There is just too much potential with some of these ideas. I also think it's going to be very important not to simply focus on the Targaryens. They should spend some time with some of the kings of Westeros. I think you could flesh out both Argilac Durrandon, the Storm King, and Harren the Black very well. It might come as a surprise, given what my channel is about, but my favourite TV show isn't Game of Thrones, or House of the Dragon. I will admit A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms gave it a run for its money, but my favourite TV show is actually The Last Kingdom. The short version is The Last Kingdom is set during the Danish invasion of England, as the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms fall, or become effectively vassals to the Vikings, until only Wessex stands. What I love about it, and why I think Uhtred of Bebbanburg is such a compelling main character, is The Last Kingdom tells its story from both the point of view of the Danes, the invaders, and the Saxons, whose kingdoms are being invaded. You see both sides of this cultural shift, and the Saxons try and push back against this never-ending stream of Danes. You then have Uhtred, who is at the very heart of the story, a Saxon raised as a Dane. You get to see both perspectives. I think the Conquest movie should take some cues from this. Let's get to know Argilac Durrandon, Harren the Black, Torrhen Stark, Lauren Lannister, Garth Gardner. Let us care, and let us understand the Westerosi point of view of it, fighting back against effectively foreign Valyrian invaders with these unstoppable superweapons. While the outcome of the battles will still mostly be predictable, at the very least the audience might actually care about some of the characters in them, not just nameless Lannister king or random Gardner horsemen. I'm not saying don't focus on Aegon, Visenya and Rhaenys, but don't just make it all about them. I think you could use Orys Baratheon as your kind of Uhtred-like figure. He is after all Aegon, Visenya and Rhaenys' bastard half-brother, so he is technically half Valyrian and Westerosi. Like Uhtred, he could have a mix of culture and, while supporting his siblings, have some conflict about what he's actually a part of. You could create a really compelling dynamic between Argilac and Orys, which could make their duel even more compelling. So really the question is, what is actually the story this movie is going to tell? The narrative of the Conquest. And what can they do to add jeopardy and challenge? Hence why telling the story via the people being invaded, to me at least, makes a hell of a lot of sense. They also need to be extremely careful how they handle Aegon, Visenya and Rhaenys as characters. Their shadows loom large in the histories of Westeros, with Aegon seemingly becoming this almost godlike figure in the history books. But the truth is, we know very little about him as a character, other than a few key details. He seems to be a good warrior. He loved his younger sister Rhaenys, yet married his elder sister Visenya out of duty. He was clearly a strong tactician. The Conquest was very well planned out. He seemed to have spent years scouting parts of Westeros. But he was also very smart, making certain changes to House Targaryen before the Conquest to make them seem less like foreign invaders. Things like converting to the faith of the Seven, and ensuring he and his sisters spoke the common tongue. He seemed to be a man that people respected, given how many of his foes became loyal allies to House Targaryen. Outside of these things, however, things that we only know because of the historical impact of his actions, we actually know very little about Aegon as a man himself. Aegon is a blank slate of a character for the writers to work with. The issue is, I'm not wholly sure if that's a good thing or not. Part of what's interesting about Aegon is the very fact he is this enigma, a bit of a mystery. I'm going to use Doctor Who as an example here. What makes the character of the Doctor work so well is, while we know of course the character and the series of different personalities they've had, we've seen them all on screen. But for a very long time, the show maintained this sense of mystery around who the character actually is. In my view, part of the reason why modern Doctor Who declined so rapidly since 2016 is because they began peeling back the layers too much and began answering questions that never should have been answered in the first place. So they have to get that balance right with Aegon. Like the Doctor, we know their character. They have a clear personality, but there is still this slight shroud of mystery to him. If we do also take the Last Kingdom approach and give the kings of Westeros a bigger role to play in the story, this will also take some of the pressure off Aegon and allow other characters to bear the burden of carrying key parts of the story, keeping the slight distance with Aegon. We know far more about Visenya and Rhaenys, with George fleshing out their personalities and characters a lot more in Fire and Blood than he did with Aegon, where he intentionally kept it vague. Rhaenys seems like a very loving and kind-hearted person with a love for the small folk and a big advocate for the rights of women, as well as being a patron of the arts, filling the halls of the Aegon fort with singers and mummers. She was described as a beauty, light and playful. While not much of a warrior, she was still of course a powerful dragon rider, as we see with her involvement in the Conquest. Out of the three heads of the dragon, we know the most about Visenya, given she outlived both Aegon and Rhaenys, and played a key role in the reign of King Aenys, and was instrumental in Maegor the Cruel claiming the crown. She is the best warrior out of the three, very serious and protective of her family, rumoured to have dabbled in the dark arts and sorcery and poisons. She was described as a passionate and dark woman, with even those who loved her best considering her stern, serious and unforgiving. You see, a real pet peeve of mine is this narrative where many within the A Song of Ice and Fire community simply dismissed Fire and Blood as just a history book, claiming there really isn't any characters. I've seen this argument made specifically to justify some of the more questionable changes the show made with House of the Dragon. To some degree, this is actually true. Fire and Blood at its core is a history book. No, the characters are not as well developed as the main book series, and we do only get a surface level idea of who they are as people, but to say they have no character is disingenuous and a bad faith argument. With Visenya and Rhaenys in particular, there is enough for a writer to build upon, and for actors to introduce their own flair to, but when it comes to Aegon in particular, you've got to be really careful with what you do with that freedom, and the direction you take him in. He's going to be important to the story being told, but we cannot forget the shadow he casts over the whole lore of Westeros. I do have one kind of crazy idea that could add a layer of depth to the story. We know that Aegon was seen as a sort of foreign invader, given how much more connected House Targaryen were to their Valyrian heritage at this time. Aegon had only recently converted to the faith of the Seven, to appeal more to the people he wished to conquer. What if, to really hit home the point about House Targaryen being this foreign invader, Aegon, Visenya and Rhaenys could speak the common tongue, so in this case English, maybe in a bit of a broken manner or with a thick accent. House Targaryen by this time had been on Dragonstone for 150 years, so they would clearly know how to speak the common tongue, but I would love to see them speaking High Valyrian to each other as their primary language, with the common tongue as a secondary. However, the issue here is the general viewing audience has this pre-built image of House Targaryen in their heads. I'm not sure they would be a fan of such a bold move, which frankly is understandable. While in the last decade, the line between TV and movie actors has become blurred with the rise of streaming shows, it makes casting a movie such as this a real challenge. The dilemma here is, do you go for some big name actors or cast a wider net for someone less known? I don't think they're going to go with any big name stars for this movie for two simple reasons. If they do want to continue on with the reign of Aegon, or into Aenys and Maegor, I suspect it might be very difficult to keep a big name Hollywood actor attached to the project. There's also the financial side to consider. This movie, given the amount of dragons involved and the sheer scale of the story, is going to be ludicrously expensive to make. Attaching three Hollywood names to play the lead roles might doom the financial prospects of the project. I think they might go with some lesser known actors, kind of like what House of the Dragon did, where the cast were of course very well known, especially in the TV and theatre sphere, but had only a handful of really truly big names among them, such as Matt Smith and Paddy Considine, who I've seen some argue aren't actually big names. I remember when they were actually cast, there were arguments among the fans about whether they actually constituted big name actors. If you want to cast some A-list names, you could still make it work with some of the supporting cast. I like the idea of Argilac Durrandon or Harren the Black, or Torrhen Stark for example. Characters that need gravitas and awe to them, I made a video a long time ago about the issues of casting an Aegon's Conquest project, and I made it clear that despite how popular some of the fan castings, like Henry Cavill as Aegon and Catherine Winterick as Visenya are, that it was highly unlikely ever going to happen. Because honestly, I was low-key sick to death of seeing badly photoshopped pictures of Henry Cavill as Aegon on YouTube thumbnails. Simply put though, both Cavill and Winterick are too old for the roles during this time period. Aegon, Visenya and Rhaenys are all supposed to be in their 20s after all. I don't think either of them can pull that off anymore, as much as I like them as actors. If I'm going to be honest, I could never actually picture Cavill as Aegon anyway. He's just not the type of actor I could picture as the character. I don't actually have any suggestions to whom I would cast, or I'd like to see, but I'm really keen to see where they go with it. But they do have to be very careful with the path they go down. When House of the Dragon introduced the concept of Aegon's prophecy, I wasn't personally a huge fan of it, despite the idea coming from George R.R. Martin himself. While I like the idea of Aegon having a vision of the long night before being his motivation for the conquest, with this dream being passed from king to heir, I hate how Ryan Condal gave it such an important role in setting up the Dance of the Dragons. How much of what caused the dance turned into simple misunderstandings because of the prophecy. Now, when they added this into House of the Dragon, a lot of people were put off, given how much of a disappointment the Long Night actually ended up being in Game of Thrones, with the addition of the prophecy being so linked to that, reminding them of it, and thus tethering House of the Dragon to that disappointment. They also would not have known at the time, or really given it much thought, what this prophecy would mean if they ever adapted the Conquest to screen. The movie, if it wants to remain consistent with the show, is going to have to include the prophecy in some capacity, again tethering the project back to the disappointment that came from Season 8 of Thrones. However, I actually think it could work really well for the movie as a plot device and establishing what the hell is going on at the start of the movie. You can't, after all, just open up with Aegon landing on the shores of the Blackwater. If I were writing it, I would actually open up with the Doom of Valyria with a voiceover explaining the story of Daenys the Dreamer and the Doom, ending it with Aegon's prophecy. Kinda like how the Fellowship of the Ring opens, with a huge but interesting and compelling lore dump. But that's just my take. All I can say is they will have to handle that aspect with care. So while I think the Aegon's Conquest movie has some real challenges that it needs to overcome, with the right people involved in the project and enough financial backing, I can't see why it can't be great. But what I want to know, is there anything about this project you are worried about? And who do you think could play the three heads of the dragon? Because I'm kind of a little bit stumped by it. Let me know in the comments.